Hi, everyone. I'm Andy. I'm the UX team lead at Pronto Forms here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. We're in the LCAP space, so we built a low-code application platform that allows our clients to create their own complex workflows and forms for their field workers. So we're kind of in the periphery of healthcare, but many of our clients are in healthcare and medical, and they use our apps to inspect hospitals and medical equipment. So before we get started, I think it's important that I clearly state I'm not a mental health professional. What I'm sharing today are just my own personal opinions and suggestions for what worked for me. If you think you're struggling in any way, I would encourage you to speak to a healthcare professional. Now, I'll be honest with you and tell you right now, this is a different kind of talk than what we've seen so far today. I'll be talking about my feelings and emotions. Gasp. This is kind of structured like a case study, but I'm the case that we're studying, I guess. So you won't really see flowcharts or mock-ups or examples. I'll be giving you a bit of a mental break with my talk, but I promise I'll tie it all back to UX by the end. So back in the November-December timeframe, I was forced to take a leave of absence to deal with my mental health. But that wasn't the first time I've had issues. So I'll start by giving you a bit of background about myself and, of course, all my struggles. I'll talk about why this is such an important topic for designers in particular. Then I'd like to talk a bit about how I use UX to take care of our clients' mental wellness. So these are kind of like the results of my case study. And finally, I'll end by sharing a few tips on what helps maintain my mental wellness in the hopes that it might help someone out there who may also be struggling. So let's dive in. I frequently deal with generalized anxiety disorder, often caused by sensory overload. I'm considered to be on the autistic spectrum, although very mild. I'm an introvert most of the time. And I have a chronic mood disorder that usually shows up as depression about every 3 or 4 years. But perhaps the most surprising part of this is that I've lived with these issues my whole life, yet I've only really discovered and been diagnosed with those issues in the past couple of years. As a child, I was told by teachers that I was shy, distracted, and unfocused because I like to daydream and create worlds in my head instead of participating in class. Looking back now, I can understand how my autism played a role here. As a teenager, I was told I was allergic to work because I wanted to draw and paint and build computers instead of working on cars with my dad. Coming from a family of tough guys like movers and mechanics and farmers, that was hard. I was told I would be expelled from high school and it would never amount to anything because I'm too much of a dreamer. And if that's not bad enough, I was at an arts-focused high school on top of that. And when it came time to apply to universities, I was told I'd never succeed in tech because I'm too creative. And I'd never succeed as an artist because I'm too techie. But let me back up for a second, because between the time that I left high school and the time that I started in UX, 10 years had passed. And more importantly, a mental breakdown was the catalyst for me finding my calling. After graduating high school, I was accepted into the fine arts program at the Ontario College of Art and Design, and also in computer systems tech at Algonquin College. I chose money over art and went into tech. And I did well. I opened my own computer store at 22 years old. Then I worked as a PKI system administrator. And I got married at 23 years old. I kept myself busy doing everything for the wedding, from designing and printing my own invitations to building the centerpieces to composing and recording the song for our first dance. But after the wedding, I started feeling off. I was getting really sick for weeks at a time. I was angry all the time. I was kind of retreating, just trying to get away from everything and everyone. Eventually, I took a month off work And during that time, I saw a therapist, and I kept doing creative things. Being creative helped. The talk therapy helped even more. I got better, and then I went back to work. And by day 2, I gave my resignation. I realized immediately that I wasn't happy in a technical job and that I needed to be creative. So I quit, applied to what was now the Ontario College of Art and Design, and moved to Toronto to give up tech and be a starving artist. For almost 2 years, I lived alone in Toronto, driving back to Ottawa on weekends to be home. And during that time, with a mortgage in Ottawa and rent in Toronto, my finances took a hit. So we had to sell the house, and my wife moved to Toronto. But she had a hard time finding work, and we went months without pay. Eventually, we just got completely overwhelmed. All our bills were months behind. Tuition was due. We were about to get evicted from our apartment. And meanwhile, I was just fully immersed in my art and highly successful. I was top of my class. But once again, I started getting sick and started struggling until one day I had a full meltdown. And one night I destroyed a bunch of my art in a fit of anger and depression. But my wife eventually got a job, and I went on summer break. So things got back on track, and I got better. When I returned to school, although I was enrolled in the art program, I was a teaching assistant for the interaction design courses in the design program. And that's where I figured out that my real strength was combining art and tech together. Even before graduating, I got a job as an interaction designer in Toronto. I loved it, but I missed all my friends and family, so eventually moved back to Ottawa. I took a full-time job as a UX specialist, and during this time, my wife and I were trying to have kids unsuccessfully. So we had to look into IVF as an option. We spent almost $10,000 and months of our time going through IVF, and it was unsuccessful. And in case it wasn't clear, you don't get the 10,000 back if it doesn't work. She was told she had to have serious surgery to help with her PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And of course, she had complications before the surgery and was hospitalized. After the surgery, we spent another $10,000 for a second round of IVF, and it too was unsuccessful. That really took a toll on us, both financially and emotionally. And as difficult as that was, I had to put on a brave face and pretend everything would work out. But it didn't, and it broke us. I felt sad, and I felt alone, and I felt powerless. But since it wasn't happening to my body, voicing those feelings would make me sound like a selfish asshole. So instead, I buried myself in another project. I bought an arcade cabinet and spent all my free time rebuilding it. It was just my way of coping with things. Now, at this point, you've probably noticed the pattern. A big, stressful, difficult situation presents itself. I stay strong for everyone by distracting myself with a project, and then I burn out. But I hadn't noticed that pattern yet. So, sure enough, I was headed toward depression with another mental breakdown. Again, I was getting sick, feeling tired, and then I got laid off. Now, you might think that would have made things worse, but it didn't. I wasn't happy with the direction the company was headed in, and that was kind of weighing on me a lot. So I left a bad environment. I got to rest up, and within a few weeks, I had found a job that I absolutely loved in Montreal. That's about 2 hours away if you're unfamiliar. At the time, I didn't even realize that I was headed toward depression. But looking back now, I realize that getting laid off is really what saved me from hitting bottom. After a year in Montreal, I ended up finding my dream home and moved back to Ottawa. I found a senior UX job with a successful company pretty quickly. Within weeks, I knew it wasn't a fit, and I'd be heading down the same path again. So I gave my resignation and ended up where I am now, at Pronto Forms. And I was happy. But now that you know the pattern, you know something shitty is about to happen. About 3 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with endometrial cancer. It was caught very early, so her treatment was less invasive than it could have been, but it still required a hysterectomy. And, mild chemotherapy is still chemotherapy. I had to take her to her appointments and take care of her for a few days after each treatment because she was too weak. And I had to put on a brave face and say everything would be okay. And it was. After the surgery and the months of chemo, she's had no traces of cancer for over 2 years. But what did I do while this was going on? I stayed strong for her, and I kept myself busy with side projects. Then I felt the depression creeping in around September last year. But this time, I was aware of the pattern, so I got started on the process of getting help really early. I took time off, I saw a psychotherapist, and I eventually got better. I knew what was happening, and I had a great support system in place, both personally and at Pronto Forms, to help me get back on track and contributing the way I wanted to. And now I begin chapter 5, in the middle of a pandemic. We all have setbacks like I've described. We're living one such traumatic event together right now, but some of us are better at coping with those issues than others. You may feel angry, or you may be sad. You may be trying to find humor to cope, or look for things or people to blame. Or you may be pretending that nothing is going on. My default reaction is to stay strong, calm, and be supportive of others. This can often lead to compassion fatigue, also sometimes known as secondary trauma. That's defined as the emotional residue or the strain of exposure to working with those suffering from the consequences of traumatic events. And it can occur due to exposure on a one case basis, or it can build up over time. Sounds familiar, right? People tend to feel relaxed and at ease in my presence during difficult times, and I wouldn't want to change that. The world needs people like that, especially in trying times like we're living every day right now. Most importantly, I'm taking steps to take care of my mental wellness this time. That doesn't mean I have a cure, but I know some techniques that help me, and I'll share some of those a little later with you. But why did I spend half my talk telling you all this? Maybe you found my life story interesting. Maybe I bored you to tears. I don't know. But there are a few good reasons I shared what I've been through. For one, it's important for everyone to realize you are not alone. We've all had to live through difficult, traumatic times, and it's totally normal to be affected by it, however it affects you. And second, it's a topic that's very important for creatives to hear. Studies have shown that creatives are more prone to mental health issues and mood disorders, and UX designers are no exception. In the picture on screen, you can see the top brain image shows a creative when alternating between experimental tasks and control tasks, while the lower brain is a control subject with the same activity. There are clear, measurable differences that can be seen in brain activity and processing, and this has been proven in several studies over the years. We have a constant pressure to create, but creativity is hard to control. I like to describe it like flowing water. Sometimes we wait in frustration. Other times it's like drinking from a fire hose. But no matter how much flow our creativity has, we're still expected to come up with new ideas all the time. Business doesn't stop because we're having an off day. We pour our heart and soul into our work, only to have a multitude of stakeholders tear it apart. Now, don't get me wrong, I went to arts. We all understand that that's part of the process, but that doesn't make it any easier to handle. Then we have to deal with constantly switching contexts. The UX field is very wide, and everyone on my team handles the whole UX spectrum, from the very technical data architecture work to the very psychological aspects, all the way down to design of icons. Creating our work across different platforms for different features, all at different states in that UX process, increases our cognitive load exponentially. And finally, lack of recognition in UX can increase feelings of isolation and inadequacy. And it makes us feel like we have no impact. The very nature of UX means that our best work goes completely unnoticed. If we do our job right, using our feature should feel natural, simple, and just let you do what you want. Good UX is invisible. But of course, anything we get wrong, anything that causes friction for the user, is noticed right away. At Pronto Forms, we need to keep in mind the cascading impact of our UX decisions on mental health. So allow me to explain what I mean by that cascading impact. Our clients will have field workers using our apps, some of which use our apps to maintain important medical equipment or construction equipment. These field workers are in high stress environments, such as hospitals, secure labs, or construction sites. Right now, we actually have users going into COVID-19 treatment rooms to inspect ventilators. So we have to ensure that our UX doesn't cause additional undue stress or anxiety for those users. In addition to this, we need to ensure that our designs are accurate, precise, and exceedingly clear in order to prevent error. If the field worker is confused by something that we designed and misses an important reading that could impact some equipment, that malfunction equipment could then cause stress and anxiety for all of the other people who come in contact with it. So in our case, it's not just our users, but our users' users. And for us, that means potentially millions of people. Some of the issues that users might face are inattention, sensory overload, anxiety, and depression. So let's take a look at those in a little more detail and see, as UX designers, how we can help ease some of those concerns. Now, some of these might go against what Barbara talked about a little bit earlier, but keep in mind, these are different users. So not clinicians, but maybe patients or people working with clinicians. Inattention may sound like it's related to our ever-shrinking attention spans. And yes, that is indeed one cause, but it can also be a side effect of other mood disorders and mental health issues. Chronic stress can have negative effects on the brain, specifically in hippocampus and prefrontal cortex memory and cognitive functions. What that really means is when a user is already stressed, they may have difficulty remembering things. So there are ways in which we as designers can help reduce some of those negative effects. And they mostly come in the form of simplicity. Now that might include limiting distracting UI elements, such as notifications and badges that exist solely to take the user's attention away from what they're actively trying to do, or reducing unnecessary and distracting motion and animation. Just allow the user to focus on the task that they're trying to accomplish without interruption. Sensory overload is what happens when people are overwhelmed by their senses. For example, a busy restaurant would trigger my sensory overload because there's a lot of external stimuli. It's a constant onslaught of tastes and sounds and smells and visual noise. So when working on the design, it's important to account for the user's environment. And again, Andrew spoke about user context for clinicians earlier. In our case, the user may be at a loud construction site with heavy machinery nearby, or in a hospital room with beeping equipment and critical movement from staff. The goal here is to not add to the overload that may already be happening all around the user. So this can be as simple as example, avoiding visuals and sounds together whenever possible. Anxiety is next, and it affects almost 20% of the population, yet we rarely take it into consideration while designing. People with anxiety live with fear and apprehension, including while using our software. If they become overwhelmed, they'll simply abandon their task. In order to avoid that, think about how you can provide reassurance while they're working. Assist them in completing smaller segments of an overall task. So make your interactions shorter. For example, break up that long form into clear and concise smaller steps. You can also be forgiving about how you handle errors, or design in a way that avoids errors entirely. So avoid using negativity or blame. For example, instead of saying, you cannot upload a PDF, you could say, we only accept JPEG files. And finally, use terms and language that is familiar to the user, not just internal staff, and provide clarity of communication. Last but not least, we need to account for depression. This one can be more difficult to control, but some of the effects of depression might be lack of energy, apathy, lower threshold for abandonment, and an overall sensitivity to words, designs, colors. The key to helping a user with depression is, again, to keep your design as simple as possible. The more complex the task, the more likely the user is to abandon. So focus on making quick, meaningful interactions that provide immediate value. You can also provide quick and easy access to get live help and increase engagement that way. Knowing that they have someone they can reach out to if they get stuck may be enough to let the user feel supported in their task. Now, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about what has helped me, what resources you might have available, and we'll even do a quick exercise, because the first step in taking care of your user's mental health is to take care of your own. So, what can you do when you're struggling? Well, the first thing you should do is seek professional help. Your family doctor should probably be your first visit. You'd be surprised how much our physical health affects our mental health. If your vitamin D is low, you could feel tired and lethargic. If your gut microbiome is off, you could have a multitude of issues, including mood disorders. A doctor can also help you with any prescriptions you may need and prescribe talk therapy in case your insurance requires that paper trail. Speaking of which, talk therapy should be your next step. There are several options and terms you might find: psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy, counseling, and there's no wrong answer. Do what works best for you. I have found that psychotherapists tend to work best for me. They don't prescribe medication. They tend to focus on helping you explore what you're feeling and find out why you might be feeling that way, and then teach you techniques to help you deal with those issues. In many cases, psychotherapists will often be supervised by a clinical psychologist as well, in case medication is recommended. If you are looking for a therapist, I personally found psychologytoday.com to be helpful. You can view therapist profiles and see who's right for you. It's kind of like Tinder for your mental health. And of course, be sure to check what your insurance or benefits provide so you're not too much out of pocket. And finally, I'll tiptoe into a delicate topic. I'm in Canada, where this is all legal now. So if you're in the US or somewhere else, do consult with your own state laws. I don't want any of you getting in trouble from my advice. But medical cannabis, specifically CBD and THC oils, have helped me manage my anxiety and sensory overload. And I only have to use it when I'm overwhelmed. So what that means is I don't have to be on any daily medication, and I don't really have any side effects, unless you count a good night's sleep a side effect. If you are curious about medical cannabis and how it can help, I'm happy to share my own anecdotal thoughts on it, but you should speak to a doctor to make sure that it's right for you, because it can worsen certain conditions. Okay, let's do a quick activity together. So get yourself a piece of paper and something to write with. This is one of the exercises from my own therapy session, so it's a good starting point as you start to examine yourself introspectively. I kind of consider this my early detection test to gauge how I'm doing. All you have to do is write down 3 things you're grateful for today. I'll give you about 15 seconds while I rehydrate. So maybe you wrote those 3 things really quickly. Maybe you were struggling to come up with your 3 answers. I'm not sure. If so, it doesn't mean you're in trouble, but it means that you might need to train yourself to seek out those positive things and just be more aware of your thoughts. If you want a challenge, I would encourage all of you to continue this activity once a day for a week. The catch is that you can't reuse a previous answer. So I find the more my mental health is suffering, the harder it'll be for me to write those 3 things as the week goes on. And I'm not sure if I've said this enough, so I'll say it again. Talk to a professional or anyone, really. It's the most important thing you can do. Seriously. You know what? I'm going to take my own advice and go off script here for a moment. I have no idea how this is going to go, but I feel like I should share how I felt very recently. So a couple of months back, I was supposed to present this talk during Mental Health Week, and it was not a great day for me. I'm not going to lie. It started out great because I felt ready to present and I felt good about my talk. And as the day went on, I started getting a little more stressed out because this is, after all, a tough subject for me to revisit. I had everything set up and plugged in, and I was ready to go. And then 5 minutes before I'm supposed to go live, my computer just goes black, dead. I'm freaking out. I'm trying to let people know what's happening while also trying to get it back up. And then the reality set in. I was not going to get it working. And I kind of lost my shit. I was so angry, but I was angry at myself for letting it happen. I was telling myself, I should have been prepared. I should have noticed my battery was draining. I'm such an idiot. Then I felt like I let everyone down, that I let myself down. I felt embarrassed and stupid for letting it happen. I was sad because all that preparation was for nothing. I even had a hard time breathing, like I couldn't catch my breath for a little while. And it ended up being rescheduled to the following day, but in that moment, I just felt the weight of all that negative thinking and the stress of having to wait another day and the guilt of having to reschedule all the attendees. So, as you can see, even when I'm good, I can still have days that are a struggle. But I remembered this talk and my thinking styles, and I worked to overcome some of those thoughts. So here, let's get back to the presentation. And speaking of those thinking styles, let's take a closer look. There are 10 dominant thinking styles. So as I list them, I want you to think about what styles you gravitate towards. The first one is all or nothing. This is like a black or white view of the world. So either I do the presentation perfectly or I don't do it at all. Next is mental filter. That's only paying attention to certain types of evidence. For example, as I mentioned before about UX designers, only seeing your failures without seeing your success. Next is jumping to conclusions. Now, that might be trying to predict the future, which you can't do, or imagining you know what someone is thinking, and you don't. For example, everyone will think I flaked out of the presentation. Emotional reasoning is assuming that our feelings speak the truth. For example, I felt embarrassed, so I must be stupid. Next is labeling, and that's pretty obviously assigning labels to other people and to ourselves. For example, I'm useless or I'm an idiot. Overgeneralizing is seeing a pattern based on a single event, or maybe being overly broad with our conclusions. For example, my designs are always trash, or I keep screwing up all my presentations. Next is disqualifying the positive. That's discounting the good things that happen or that you have done. For example, oh, that doesn't count. Anyone can do that. Magnification and minimization. That's blowing things out of proportion or making it seem less important than it is. For example, I let the whole company down by canceling the talk. Number 9, critical words. Using words like should or must can make us feel guilty or like we've already failed. If we use critical words on others, the result is usually frustration. For example, you should work faster, or I should have paid attention to my laptop battery. And finally, personalization. That's blaming yourself or taking responsibility for something that wasn't completely your fault, or blaming others for something that was your fault. For example, I really messed up and it's my fault the presentation was canceled. So there are a few of those that I tend to gravitate towards, and you may have recognized yourself in a few of them as well. The key is just to be aware of those thinking styles and to try to reduce your reliance on them as much as possible. And this is equally true while working on UX projects. Be aware of how you might inadvertently be injecting those thinking styles into the work that you do. So before we move on to the Q&A, I'll leave you with one final thought. It's important to care for your mental health, but as designers, we also carry the burden of caring for the mental health of our users. If we aren't thinking about mental health, then we may introduce bias in our designs, or we may not be aware of how our designs might affect others. I believe the impact that we have on our users' mental health is very real, and we have a responsibility to ensure their well-being. But in order to do so, we have to take care of ourselves first. So remember, talk to someone, take care of your mental wellness, and don't be afraid to reach out if you're struggling. We're all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Andy. That was probably one of the best topics I've heard in a very, very long time, I have to be honest. I think it's something that a lot of practitioners, they don't think about their own health when they're designing. So I thought that was a really good topic. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think there's three, Ash just mentioned, I think it's more comments than questions. How are you doing this bloody awesome presentation?
It's I'm using Prezi. So I think Prezi existed for a while, but I think fairly recently they released Prezi Video. So it allows you to kind of superimpose your slides on top of video. It's a really fantastic piece of software.
Super. Thank you. And I think his name's Cosman. I've noticed this comes especially when we're often too attached to our deliverables, especially when feedback comes pouring in.
Yes.
I don't know if that's something I don't know if that's something you find or.
Well, yeah. In our case, it tends to happen. It really depends on your workflow and how your company works, of course. In our case, we get that feedback. We'll tend to get that feedback really early on in the process, way before deliverables, only because we'll work very closely with the project managers to build the system before even a single line of code is written. So we design the whole thing and make sure it's fully packaged and ready, and then it goes to dev. So we'll get that feedback way before kind of deliverables. But what ends up happening, and potentially what's happening with this person, is that once you deliver, then you get all the people who didn't see it come out of the woodwork and start, chiming in with their thoughts on it. So, yeah.
Okay, and we just have to, Jessica just made mention here. I believe we creators of this world are united by these struggles. Psychology has shown that this several times that resilience and traumatic experiences foster creativity. After creativity is the problem solving. The more we get challenged in life, the more we practice problem solving, which gets reflected in our artwork, which is so true. Absolutely agree with that.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
Super. Anyway, thank you so much for that. I don't know if you could download slides. I doubt whether that's going to be slides, but your video will be made available.
Okay. I did recreate the slides in a different software, so I will be uploading those to Slack a little bit later.
Perfect. Perfect.
Great.
Anyway, thank you so much, everyone. Great topic so far. Thank you, Andy. I really appreciate you sharing, man. Fantastic talk. And we'll see you after the break. Thank you, everyone.